Hey there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andrew Clark, and in today's video, I want to take a look at 8 different things that you can start doing to vastly improve your rhythm guitar playing. Now, while playing solos and improvising is a whole lot of fun, one of the most important aspects of playing the guitar and being a great guitar player is your ability to play rhythm. So what I wanted to do here is cover a handful of techniques and tips and tricks ranging from beginner to maybe a little bit more advanced, so that no matter where you're at with your playing, you will get something out of this video. And since I'll be going over so many of these, if you're newer to the guitar, please don't feel like you need to learn all of them. But before we get into it, we need to talk about today's sponsor, Guitareo. Now, some of you may not know this about me, but I've actually been working on and off with Guitareo for years. There's even some great YouTube videos that I was involved in back in the day where you can see me go through a whole wide range of different hairstyles. Now, these days, I do still work for them, where I get to write guitar content kind of behind the scenes. But this week they've been kind enough to sponsor one of my own videos on my own channel. So let's jump over to the computer and I'll tell you a little bit more about them. So Guitareo is an online learning platform that contains thousands of video lessons and resources to help you improve your guitar skills. Whether you use the desktop version or their mobile app, you'll be able to learn over 1,000 songs with the help of their interactive practice tool, which perfectly syncs the tabs up with the original song, allowing you to slow things down to match your pace and even loop specific sections you want to work on. There are also live streams, community forums, and a ton of exclusive video courses, including this brand new one from one of my personal favorite guitar players, Mark Lettieri. And if that wasn't enough, with access to Guitareo, you'll also have full access to the other Musora learning platforms like Drumeo, Piano, and Singio. So if the site looks like something that might interest you guys, they've actually hooked me up with an exclusive 30-day free trial link. So if you guys want to help support my channel here on YouTube and also get some more support for improving your own guitar skills, head down below the video and check it out. Huge thank you to Guitareo for sponsoring this video, and now let's get into the lesson. So keep in mind that this is more of an overview of a bunch of techniques and tips rather than a deep dive on one or two. So if there is a technique that particularly interests you, please make sure to let me know in the comments so that I can know to make another follow-up video specifically on that. All right, first up, this one's kind of a beginner one, but it is the constant strumming technique. And the constant strumming technique is essentially turning your strumming hand, whether you're right or left-handed, into your metronome. And so something you'll notice is when I play rhythm guitar, even when I'm not hitting the strings, my hand is always bouncing. And this is even the case with more complex patterns. So what I mean by that is even if I'm playing a very simple strumming pattern, I'm still not going to hit the strings on every single downstroke or every single upstroke. So for example, if I play these chords, and what this essentially allows you to do is as your arm is moving up and down, even if you're not playing, when you do decide to let your pick go in and touch the strings, it's gonna be perfectly in time with the music. So what you'll see a lot of people do is when they're listening to a song and they hear a strumming pattern, a lot of times they're just trying to copy the strumming pattern with the least amount of movements possible. So I'm gonna show you how this works with a very popular strumming pattern, and I'm not gonna let you see my strumming hand, and I'm just gonna play, and you're gonna just listen and try and decipher the strumming pattern yourself. So it's this. Okay, so to nail the timing, there's a bunch of different ways you could go about it, but if you were to play it all in downstrokes, right, because you're just doing it by ear, you might end up with something like this. And you can see my hand bouncing all over the place, and it's actually really hard to get that to sound super tight if I'm only using downstrokes. So the trick to getting it to sound really smooth is basically just to take the quarter note and turn this arm right here into a metronome. So basically what I'm gonna do is, if the pattern is ba 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 ba, I'm just going ba 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 ba. And as my arm is bouncing to the most simplified rhythm of the pattern, all I need to do is decide when to touch the strings and when not to touch the strings. And essentially this pattern is a down, down, up, down, up, but I'm not going down, down, up, down, up. Mechanically like that. Instead, what I'm doing is just letting my arm do the bouncing along just like a metronome, and then just choosing when my pick hits. So it's just gonna be. And with 99% of cases with very simple strumming patterns, they're all going to be using some form of this constant strumming technique, and it really helps the guitar to sit in the pocket and feel like it's a part of the rhythm section. Now, to take this even further, the same concept is going to apply even with more advanced strumming patterns. And what you're going to notice is with my arm that this part here is going to kind of continue at a pretty consistent pace, and that might change. It might double up sometimes, but it's kind of always going to be hopping and bouncing and kind of keeping me in time, even with the more advanced patterns. So here's a little bit of an example. And this is really just about feeling the music and more than just what your hands and fingers are doing. So this might look a little bit different for you, but it's really just about getting your body vibing and moving with the rhythm of the music. And this is typically why I don't teach people static strumming patterns, because you're gonna be way better off learning this constant strumming technique, getting your arm and getting your shoulder bouncing with the basic beat of the music, and then creating your own strumming patterns by basically deciding when you hit the strings and when you don't. All right, next up, we've got something called floating and anchoring. And basically what I mean by this is letting this hand and this arm float over the strings or anchoring it on the guitar. And both of these techniques are a very basic and important part of rhythm guitar playing, but what I want to focus on here is combining them. So what I mean is getting used to having your arm floating like this. And then as you're playing those chords with your hand floating like that, being able to come down and anchor it. Now, there's no set place you need to learn how to anchor it. It's going to be a little bit different for everybody depending on your body and what's comfortable, but basically anchoring it on or near the bridge of the guitar. And the reason this is so important is because as your hand is floating and loose, it's very easy to play a relaxed, tight rhythmic pattern. But the problem comes in when you need to be very accurate with the strings you are picking, if you want to play a double stop lick or some pentatonic lick, or if you want to palm mute. So what you want to work on here is have that hand floating as you play chords, and then work on bringing it down onto the bridge. So my hand is floating. It's really hard to play individual strings without looking down at the strings to see where my pick is going. But if I were to take my hand and anchor it on the bridge or near the bridge, then I can actually feel where all the strings are. So now without looking down at my strings, I can actually play single note licks and feel where all those strings are. But this technique rolls really well into our next technique, which is palm muting. And I'm not talking about the typical type of palm muting like chugging like this that you might learn in rock music. What I'm talking about instead is using it to kind of control your dynamics. There's a whole lot you can do to control your dynamics using this technique, and it's going to require you to be able to float your hand and then bring it back down. But instead of bringing it down behind the bridge or onto the bridge, you're going to bring it a little bit forward onto those strings. And to kind of show you what I mean is if I start palm muting, which you should probably already have the basic technique down, but the idea is you bring your hand just over the strings enough to kind of have them mute like that. If I start with a chord progression and I start closed off like this, I can actually open things up and create a pretty cool dynamic range. So I'll show you what I mean. And you probably noticed there that the key to getting that quick opening and closing of my palm mutes is the floating and anchoring technique. So if this is something that you want to add to your own playing, really make sure that you're working on that. All right, next up is a pretty straightforward one, and it is muted strums. And all this means is in between the points where you want your guitar to come through, you can actually just mute all the strings and play like a rhythmic chop, just like that. So obviously you don't want to overdo this, but as you get better and better, especially with that constant strumming technique, it's going to give you the freedom to be able to add these in between your chords. So here's a little bit of an example of how you could use them. Now, obviously that's kind of overkill, but the idea here is it actually helps emphasize some of the actual chords that come through. It's a great way to add more rhythmic texture to a guitar part, and it also kind of doubles as a secondary percussion instrument as well. Now, these muted strums tie really well into the next one, which is string pressure. And what I mean by that is when you push down on the strings with your fretting hand like this, as you bring them up, you can mute the strings. And what this allows you to do is very tightly control the amount of a chord that comes through. Now, the trick here is learning how to bring off just enough pressure to not let go of the strings, but to just bring them up so that they're no longer touching the frets on the guitar. And the more you do it, the better you're gonna get at doing it quickly. But here's a great example of using that technique. And all I'm doing there is as I play those two notes, I'm just bringing those fingers up to stop them. So as soon as I play them, and conveniently, what this is also going to do is, depending on the position your fingers are in, is it's gonna mute the strings for you. So if you wanna add a muted strum after you've released pressure on the strings, your hand is already in a position to do that. So combining your muted strums along with learning how to release and re-engage that pressure is a really great way to add a lot of funk to your rhythm playing. All right, next up we've got highs and lows. And for this technique, what I'm talking about is making use of your low strings and your high strings on the guitar effectively. Now, if you imagine a chord progression where you're just playing every single string at the exact same velocity for every single chord, it's gonna sound very robotic. So what we can do is actually we can go back and forth between playing our low strings and our high strings, even with one chord shape, to really emulate a drum kit. And this is just another way to add a cool dynamic layer to what we're doing. Now, to show you this, I'm gonna incorporate some of the techniques we've already talked about. So a little bit of the floating and anchoring, and then also the palm muting as well. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna use our low strings in the chord. So if we're just putting one chord on here, the low strings, they're gonna emulate the kick drum or the floor tom on a drum kit. And then the high strings are gonna kind of emulate something like a snare. So what you end up with is something like this. Next up, I want to talk about the wrist twist, and there are a whole bunch of different ways to approach proper picking and strumming technique, and you really have to find the one that works best for you. But for me, what I found to be very effective is learning how to twist my wrist in the right way. So obviously we have our motion that's coming from our upper arm, our shoulder, and from our elbow a little bit. But what about the wrist? And one of the best analogies I've heard for getting the correct wrist motion, first of all, your wrist should be very relaxed. There shouldn't be any tension in it. You should be holding the pick just hard enough that it doesn't fall out of your hands. But basically, as you're holding your pick, relax your fingers, relax your hand like this. And basically what you want to do is imagine your hands are wet and you're shaking the water off of your hands like this. So it's not straight down. It's not going like this, down. That's a very awkward motion. And it's not twisting, not all the way. It's kind of like down and out. So it's a bit of a twist. Again, not straight down and not twisting, but instead, you're kind of flicking it out and imagining that you're flicking that water off. And eventually what you'll learn to be able to do is as you bounce your arm with that hand being kind of loose, you can actually double up. So as you strum down, you can kind of start wiggling your wrist around a little bit. And a lot of that motion isn't really coming from my wrist actively moving. It is coming from this upper arm part. Now, the wrist is obviously doing some work here, but basically what it allows you to do is this. I cannot stress enough how important that relaxation in the wrist is. And really honestly, don't worry so much about chording as you're working on this. Just cover your strings up like this and just focus on getting that rhythm down and getting that perfect kind of mix between going down and rotating out. So maybe this angle might be better so I can kind of show you, but basically the motion looks like that. Okay, and last up is one that's been incredibly helpful for me, and that is learning how to make micro adjustments with your pick. So basically, because you're not holding your pick very tightly with correct rhythm technique, what happens is, especially if you use very rigid picks like I do, I use a 2.5 mil, your pick is gonna start moving as it bounces off the strings, right? And unless you're holding it really tight, which is technically gonna give you bad technique and cause a lot of tension to come through your arm, which you don't want, then that pick is gonna kind of move around. And what you need to learn how to do is to use your fingers to manipulate the pick and keep it in the position you want. And this is something that can take years to perfect. I still find myself sometimes ending up with my pick in a position that doesn't really feel that comfortable while I'm playing. Okay, so a few tips to really help you get the hang of this. I'll let my camera focus there on the pick. Okay, so first up, you wanna learn how to hold it between these first two fingers and then manipulate the position of the pick only using your thumb and your first finger like this. So I'm just kind of sliding it back so that it's more sticking out like this, and then bring it back so less, and forward like that without dropping the pick. And then as you kind of get the hang of that, you want to kind of learn how to use your other finger to assist. So some people hold the pick like this. It might be a little bit easier to make your micro adjustments, but I just hold between these two fingers, and then I'll use this one just to make any adjustments here. If I rotate my pick accidentally, sometimes that happens, it can kind of help me get it back in position like this. And then beyond that is really just having a pick in your hands and getting used to just kind of flipping it around, kind of doing different things with it, putting it in a bad position, and then bringing it back to where it is comfortable for you like that. Get it in another weird spot, and then bring it back. And you can do this while you're watching TV, watching YouTube, whatever you kind of want to do. Just have a pick in your hand and just kind of flip it around, and then practice getting it back into a good position, all without obviously dropping the pick. And as you get better at this too, if you're somebody like me, when I like to play with my fingers, what I'll do is I'll still hold the pick and I'll just tuck it up in this finger like this. And because I'm so used to moving my pick around, I rarely ever drop it. Now, I sometimes will still drop it, obviously, but you'll get used to being able to move it however you want. So that's all 8 of the things that I wanted to cover in this video. Please let me know in the comments if there's 1 or 2 of these that you really want me to focus on and maybe make a dedicated video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and please also consider subscribing to the channel as well. I release a new guitar video just like this one every single week. And again, a huge thank you to the great people at Guitareo for sponsoring this video. Make sure you head down into the description and click that link to get your 30-day free trial. I think you're really gonna like it. And that's gonna be it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.